Hello and welcome to Six Part. Today I'm gonna continue the story What If Deku Had the Power of a Forgotten God? Part 3. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a big thumbs up, and to watch more videos like this, subscribe to my channel and turn that bell notification on so you never miss an upload. Now wasting no more time, let's begin.
Class 1A of the Hero course found themselves eagerly anticipating their second day of classes at UA the day following the quirk apprehension test. Senior year. Nearly all of them had been pushed to the brink on their first day of school under the threat of expulsion. Also, their homeroom teacher could decide whether or not to bother with them. The pressure that each of them had experienced was very much real, even though it had ultimately proved to be a ruse. It made sense that most of them were excited for what was ahead of them because that very homeroom teacher had also promised that today would be even more demanding and difficult than yesterday. A few notable exceptions existed. Even though Izuku, Momo, Ochako, and Tenya were excited about what was probably going to happen today, they weren't worrying about being nervous because they had already discussed it. Academically inclined Momo, Izuku, and Tenya were debating various theoretical subjects, and Ochako was just listening intently and looking amazed. Katsuki, ever the self-assured and heartless individual that he was, just sat back, feet resting on his table, and scowled at the ceiling. Whatever they did today didn't matter to him because he was going to make sure Izuku never forgot that his place was beneath him by blowing the hell out of him until he died. After all, he was the only one permitted to be at the top. Ultimately, the other individuals who did not display nervous behavior included the teen with bicolored hair who was reading quietly, the two guys with avian heads and tails who appeared to be meditating, the tallest person there, the guy with 6 arms and a face mask who was just sitting there with a neutral expression on his face, and the girl who looked like a frog, staring straight ahead with a blank expression on her face, her head tilted, and her index finger positioned just below her mouth. Izuku felt Aizawa entering his field of vision when the three of them were listening to Momo explain how she could easily make about a dozen fragmentation grenades with just a full breakfast's worth of fats, and that was only because he was paying attention. Izuku raised his eyebrows to his hairline. How in the hell? Not only does he feel smaller than he actually is, but he also experiences random appearances and disappearances from existence. Momo, who had known Izuku-kun the longest, inquired, "What is it, Izuku-kun?" Sensing that something had piqued his interest within his field of vision. "It's Aizawa-sensei," he answered, going on to explain when he saw the suspicious looks he was receiving. "You know how I can basically sense everything within my range of perception of the mantra aspect of my quirk, right? Well, yesterday I didn't notice Aizawa-sensei approaching us, so I was paying more attention to the information feed of mantra. I can barely feel his presence and moreover, it's fluctuating like crazy." Tenya slid his glasses into place. "Fluctuating?" Izuku gave a head nod. "Yeah, it feels really weird. It seems like it disappears and appears randomly," he attempted to explain, although he was aware that others would find it difficult to understand what it meant to not be aware of everything's position and presence within a certain range. You could only dream about it if you could actually experience it, and even then, you wouldn't be able to match it. Maybe it's related to his quirk. We're not sure what it is or who it is after all, Ochako mused, placing a contemplative index finger to her chin. Momo blushed even more at the mention of the nickname Ochako had made her use while they were riding the train back to their neighborhood, Oken. That might be a very real possibility. Ochako gave her a beaming smile and a double thumbs up. Ahem. That begs the question, Izuku-kun. How do we feel to your senses? Momo said, a light dust of pink across her cheeks. Izuku continued, rubbing his temple with his right finger. Well, you do feel like your quirks, though this might sound weird. When I sense someone using mantra, I can identify who is who in this way. He tried his best to describe the sensations to his mantra senses, saying, for instance, Ochako-chan feels like she is about to start floating. Tenya-kun feels almost like a race car, and you, Momo-chan, give me the impression of an always changing, unstable atom. Ochako blushed a little and perspired at the same time. That makes me sound too much like an airhead, she muttered in shame. She understood that although she had a bubbly personality, sometimes laughed at the most random things, and tended to be blunt without realizing it, she wasn't an airhead. Tenya cupped his chin and gave several stiff nods, saying, in my situation, the same would apply. Because of a quirk, depending on the gear, I can reach high speeds thanks to the engines in my calves. But that begs the question. Just what is Aizawa-sensei's quirk, taking into consideration how he feels to Izuku-kun's senses, Momo said, pausing and then speaking again. It makes sense that you would sense my presence like that, with my quirk being the ability to create anything out of my fatty cells, she said, nodding thoughtfully. Aizawa closed the door behind him and walked to stand behind his desk, giving her question no answer as he opened the door and slipped inside, erasing any noise that may have been present. Aizawa nodded, almost giving the impression that he was pleased with himself. It only took you 3 seconds to quiet down and get to your seats today. You appear to be picking up common sense. Well done. At his words, everyone started to perspire. Aizawa went on. Since we didn't have time for it yesterday because of your lack of common sense, we'll use today's homeroom session to introduce ourselves. Almost everyone's eyebrows bristled with annoyance upon hearing him. It was actually your fault, Sensei, was the general consensus among the students. You will declare your names, the name of your quirk, its function, and a fact about yourself while standing up next to your seats. Of course, the goal of this is to get to know one another better. You will study together for the next 3 years to acquire all the knowledge required to become pro-heroes. Additionally, there's a very good chance that you'll collaborate as pro-heroes. He said coldly, might as well start the camaraderie as soon as possible, or something like that, before making his way to the first student on his right to take a seat. You start. Kindly observe the seating arrangements in order. Je m'appelle Yuga Aoyama. The fair-haired teenager with glistening eyes exaggeratedly stood up and struck a princely pose, akin to one from a drama play. I'm a naval laser quirk. It goes without saying that I can fire laser beams from my navel, as its name suggests. My second language is French. It's entirely your pleasure. He concluded his introduction with an extravagant eye wink and one more flourish. Everybody was sweating over the ridiculousness of what had just transpired. However, Izuku dutifully wrote down his classmate's name, the name of his quirk, and what it accomplished. His notebook contained all the pertinent information about heroes, their quirks, what they accomplished, and the various ways in which they could be used. All Might had told him that this was a very beneficial habit that would serve him well in the future, and Izuku had continued to do it even more enthusiastically after receiving such a recommendation. He wore a belt that probably increased the strength of his lasers to the point where they could easily destroy the robot villains. If he can find a way to shoot those lasers from other parts of his body, he would be a very difficult person to fight against. He can shoot lasers from his navel. While the point of origin is a bit rigid, I remember him being in the same area as me during the entrance examination. The girl with pink hair and pink skin, who had black sclera, horns, and yellow pupils, appeared after Aoyama. She excitedly jumped up from her seat, sporting a grin on her lovely face. After the weirdo, it's my turn. It's Mina Ishido by name. I call my peculiarity acid. I have the ability to control the solubility and viscosity of a corrosive liquid that I secrete from my body. I also look this way because of my quirk. Whoa. I also enjoy breakdancing. Glad to have met each of you. She smiled and gave a double peace sign as she concluded her introduction. Izuku wrote in his notebook, blushing slightly, she's cute, but if she can coat her entire body with her acid, she can be an extremely dangerous close-quarters fighter. Not only that, but if she can shoot the acid far away from her, she also has an answer against those that fight at a distance. The girl who resembled a frog came next. She introduced herself with composure, getting to her feet and saying, my name is Suyu Asui, Ribbit. I can do anything a frog can do thanks to a quirk I call frog. So I'm always experimenting and learning new skills. Rainy days are my favorite. She said simply, please take care of me, before returning to her seat. Thought Izuku blushed a little from Mina, despite looking a bit like a frog. She is also very cute, shook his head, blinked, and turned his attention back to his writing. Well, anyways, if she can indeed do anything a frog can do, then she has an arsenal of abilities that will allow her to respond to many different situations. She'll be a very well-balanced heroine when she develops all her abilities, he thought. Tenya was the next to speak, rising robotically from his seat, bowing stiffly before speaking solemnly and erecting himself. My name is Tenya Iida, he said. Engine is my oddity. It gives me a set of engines inside my calves that, depending on the gear they're in, let me go fast. Studying is fun for me. I hope everyone can make the most of their time here at the prestigious UA facilities. He uttered those words, then bowed once more and resumed his seat. As serious and diligent as ever, huh? Izuku asked, smiling broadly at Momo, who was giggling behind her hand. In any case, Tenya-kun's quirk is extremely formidable. It allows him to reach speeds that give him enough momentum to generate enough force to destroy the robot villains, and he is though enough to not hurt himself while doing that. He'll be a force to be reckoned with in the future, Izuku said, teasingly. Next was Ochako, who was seated next to Tenya. She got up and grinned broadly at everyone, saying, "My name is Ochako Uraraka. I have a quirk called Zero Gravity, which allows me to control gravity. I can make objects float or become weightless when I touch them. I love to stargaze as a pastime." She said, "Please, let's all get along," then returned to her seat. Izuku thought seriously as he scribbled in his notebook. Ochako-chan said that she can manipulate gravity, but is it really limited to making things weightless or float? If she can make things heavier, she can become a fearsome combatant by both changing the tempo of a fight or manipulating the environment as she likes. Then he blushed and said, "She's not only cute and a good person, but she can become wonderful heroine." The next young woman was blonde, calm-natured, and had small black eyes and a thick tail with hair at the end. Her name was Mashirao Ojiro. It's a quirk I call tail. I have a tail that is both flexible and strong, as you can all see. It has all the advantages of having an extra limb that you can choose to use. Martial arts is something I like to practice. He thanked everyone for listening and bowed formally before taking a seat. That tail is strong enough to destroy the robot villains, so if he can effectively apply the usage of his tail to his fighting style, he'll be as unpredictable as he'll be dangerous. Izuku perked up at the last bit. So, he likes martial arts, huh? Maybe I can ask for a spar and we can exchange techniques and training tips. Izuku also remembered that he was in the same area as me during the entrance examination. Another blonde teenager with thin eyebrows and spikier hair with a black lightning-shaped stroke trailed behind Mashirao. He stood up, tried to smirk coolly, and pointed confidently at himself. "His name is Denki Kaminari," he said. "I'm an electrified person. My entire body has the ability to emit electricity. I like cute girls and everything that's trendy," he declared before attempting, once more, to look cool by winking at every girl in the room. Since Toru is invisible, one can only assume that the other girls either ignored him or looked confused, like Okako and Tsuyu, or Momo, Mina, and Kyoka. Electricity? That is seriously overpowered, Izuku thought as he jotted down in his notebook. If he emits it from his body, it stands to reason that he can keep it inside of it. He could enhance himself with electricity not only to make close quarters combat more effective, but to also increase the speed of his synapses, increasing strength, speed, reflexes, and perception. Holy crap. The next person to appear was a fiery red-haired teenager with slightly pointed teeth and a small scar above his right eye. He smiled wildly and crossed his arms over his chest, saying, "My name is Eijiro Kirishima. Hardening is my quirk, and it does just that for me. Any part of my body can be sharpened and hardened. Crimson Riot is my favorite hero because he is the most manly of them all." Izuku thought, somewhat excited to have found someone who could relate to him in what their quirks Dida, or, in Izuku's case, an aspect of his quirk Dida. That's one impressive quirk. If his hardening abilities don't affect his mobility and he can control how much he can harden himself, then his quirk should function similarly to the armament aspect of hockey. And believe me, I know how effective something like that can be. The next person was a tall, muscular adolescent with peach-colored skin and a pointed rock-like head. He stood up hesitantly, hunching over a little, and held a small whiteboard with the words, "My name is Koji Koda. I go by Anavoice. When I speak to an animal, I can make it obey my commands and give it control. I have a pet rabbit. Please accept my apologies for any inconvenience." Koji was bowing his head when everyone had finished reading. A short while later, he resumed his seat in silence. It's true that he's a bit shy, but that quirk of his is kind of helpful. He can track people and gather information using animals, who typically have far superior senses than humans. Plus, there are animals out there that can fight back, he thought to himself as he scribbled in his notebook. A tall, muscular teenager with thick lips and spiky brown hair sat next to Koji and said, "My name is Rikido Sato. Sugar Rush is the name of my quirk. I can boost my strength 5 times for 3 minutes by consuming 10 grams of sugar, and I can prolong the duration of the strength boost by consuming more sugar. I enjoy creating a variety of sweets. It's nice to meet you all, he remarked as he sat down. Seems like the intensity of his quirk is based on how strong he is on his base form. He can only increase the duration of enhancement by eating more sugar, which is a little annoying, but it makes physiological sense. It was now time for the tall, silver-haired boy with the extra arms cut out of his uniform sleeves, who was wearing a face mask. His name is Mezzo Shoji. It's dupli arms, my quirk. I can make extra arms, but they can also mimic my mouth and ears, among other body parts. It had been cool, in an odd way. My favorite food is takoyaki, he said, projecting his mouth with the end of one of his arms. He jotted down his observations in his notebook, thinking, if he can manifest his mouth and ears, then it's probably not impossible for him to manifest eyes from which he can see, giving him an extremely expanded field of vision. Not only that, but I know for a fact that he is also extremely physical strong. The only reason I scored higher than him during the grip test yesterday was because I used armament hockey. The next person seen was a slim girl with purple hair and onyx-colored, triangular eyes. What set her apart the most were her earlobes, which resembled earphone plugs. Her name was Kyoka Jiru. I go by the nickname Earphone Jack. You see how I got earlobe earphone plugs? I can make them as long as I want, and I can even make them play my heartbeat. Just so you know, they are far tougher than they appear. At the end, she gave Denki and Mineta the evil eye because she noticed they had been staring at her and the other girls for a while. I hate players and perverts, she deadpanned. Izuku thought, blushing at first, then shuddering a little, glad that, even as a hormonal teen, he could appreciate the female form and wasn't feeling the need to blatantly ogle them just yet. In any case, sound-based quirks are extremely useful, even more so if the frequency of the sound emitted can be adjusted at will. I'll come up with suggestions, if she needs any, after I see her use her quirk. A tall adolescent with almond-shaped eyes, a trim build, and enormous teeth which were on full display due to his warm smile as he stood up was the next to introduce himself. Honta Zero is the name. Tape is my oddity. Don't underestimate my strength. I can shoot cellophane tape from my elbows, and believe me, it's as strong as steel. Oranges are my favorite fruit. I'm hoping to get along with everyone here. Izuku believed that his peculiarity would allow him great mobility in cities. If the cellophane tape he makes is as durable as he claims, then very few people will be able to escape from it once they wrap it around them enough times. The teenager who was next had a bird-shaped head but a human body otherwise. My name is Fumikage Tokiyami, he said. I call my peculiarity Dark Shadow. I am the sentient Shadow Beast's host, able to manifest outside of my body whenever I please. The amount of light in an inversely proportional matter determines its strength. I have a soft spot for apples. With a simple, thank you, he returned to his seat. Izuku thought furiously as he scribbled down all the many possible uses Tokiyami could give his quirk. A sentient shadow beast. That's awesome. He says that the less light there is, stronger it is, but he never specified just what he could with his quirk. However, I'm willing to bet that it is extremely versatile and strong enough, even during daylight, to allow to get enough points to pass the practical portion of the entrance examination. The boy with the bicolor hair and turquoise and gray eyes, who also had a burn scar on the upper left side of his face, was the next to be examined. His name was Shoto Todoroki. I refer to this oddity as half cold, half hot. I have the ability to create fire from my left side and ice from my right. I like Zaru Soba, he remarked blandly, his tone slightly distant and icy, then he returned to his seat. Impressed, Izuku jotted down a flood of ideas regarding Todoroki's quirk. His quirk has two opposite aspects. He can use both ice and fire at the same time? Holy crap, that's stupidly overpowered. Not only can he probably fight quickly changing the temperature, which is very harmful for non-enhanced humans, and if done in a large enough scale explosive, he can probably negate the setback of using one aspect of his quirk with the other. He should be one of the strongest here, as probably using both his quirk strengthened his body by exposing himself to quick and sharp changes in temperature. What if he can control the ice and fire he generates too? Holy crap. The girl who was completely invisible then had her turn. She got to her feet with a little excited jump and, Based on how her uniform's sleeves moved, she waved at everyone. My name is Toru Hagakuri. My quirk is invisibility. As you can see, or not, pun intended, my body naturally doesn't reflect light, making me invisible. I'm still learning how to turn it on and off at will, but it's too strenuous at the moment. I like plushies and cute things. Please take care of me. Izuku laughed. Izuku thought, blushing and shaking his head, even though I can't see her face, she has a nice voice and, if her uniform is anything to buy, a nice body too. What the devil is wrong with me? Really, in any case, it appears that her quirk is slight manipulation that is restricted to her and that she is not yet able to control. She'll be fierce when she does. She may have received the second lowest score yesterday, but her physical prowess should not be undervalued. She needed to be sufficiently strong and competent to have passed the entrance exam's practical section. Bakugo was the next person to leave. He got to his feet, a delinquent-like stance, his hand in his pockets and a scowl on his face. My name is Katsuki Bakugo. My quirk is explosion. From the sweat glands of my palms, I secrete a type of nitroglycerin I can detonate at will, meaning that I can make all of you explode until you are dead if you piss me off, and I hate losing. Izuku rolled his eyes and sighed with frustration. This guy is a constant. Observing the looks that Katsuki was receiving from most of the class, he thought to himself, he's not going to endear himself to anyone if he keeps up acting like this. Furthermore, he didn't need to write anything about Katsuki's quirk because, having known him for his entire life, he knew everything there was to know about it. It was most likely strengthened to its current level. Izuku realized that he was in the lead now. He mused to himself, I wish we could have chosen our own seats, because he was seated next to Bakugo, whom he obviously didn't like. Izuku gave a small shake of his head and turned his attention to introducing himself. He put on a sincere expression and smiled. Hello everyone. My name is Izuku Midoriya. My quirk is called Haki, because of how it works. I possess an energy inside my body that responds to my will regarding three aspects. Armament, which boosts by offensive and defensive capabilities. Mantra, which allows me to sense everything around me at a range depending of whether or not I am concentrating, and finally, King's Will, which is essentially projecting the raw energy outside of my body carrying my will. My preferred hobbies are video games and physical training. A pleasure to meet you all and I hope we can get along, he ended by bowing. Izuku saw how his classmate responded to him as he sat down once more. The glare that Bakugo was giving him did not surprise him, it was nothing new. With the exception of Iida, Aoyama, Koji, Sato, Shoji, and the next boy who was short, he noticed that the majority of his male classmates had the kind of curious expression that suggested they were trying to compare their eccentricities to him. He observed that the boys' and girls' faces piqued far more interest than the girls', much to his surprise and subliminal pride. He could tell that Toru was staring at him because he could sense that her face was turned in his direction. Momo was smiling softly and had a soft blush across her cheeks as she looked at him. Mina was gawking at him shamelessly and giggling. Suyu was staring at him intensely with her blank face and a dust of pink across her cheeks. Ochako's quasi-permanent blush was a bit more intense as she looked at him with gleaming eyes. Kyoka was twirling a finger around her extended earlobes as she sent what she believed to be discreet glances his way. Izuku ducked his head and flushed, but he had a smile on his face. For some reason, after his introduction, he felt happier right away. As her future grandbabies tingled with the force of a positive disturbance, Inko Midoriya, running on the treadmill in the training room equipped with all the cutting-edge gear All Might had brought for Izuku, felt the sudden need to fist pump in victory. Returning to Class 1A, the very short boy got up and started his introduction as Izuku gave a startled, pale look of terror. He said, shamelessly and with a perverted expression on his face, I'm Minoru Mineta. My quirk is Pop-Off. My scalp secretes an extremely adhesive substance that takes the shape of balls that I can rip off at will without hurting myself. What I like the most is beautiful and sexy girls. He turned to his right and glanced at Momo. Mineta was struck by a brief, focused outburst of King's Will that came from Izuku in a fit of rage, causing him to pale and stiffen in fear. Mineta shook and took his seat almost mechanically, his classmates giving him a look of confusion and disgust mixed together. Izuku gave a blink. What was that? Then, not really giving it much thought, he shrugged. He jotted down some notes, thinking, anyways, Despite how his blatant perversion is annoyance, his quirk, despite sounding so unimpressive, could be extremely useful in many situations if applied correctly and smartly. Finally, it was Momo's turn last but most definitely not least. Izuku discovered that the names were arranged alphabetically by last name only after he had written down every name. Izuku started to perspire. Isn't that a little too slack? With just a few clicks, an innumerable number of computer programs could provide you with a numerical list based on those criteria. Momo continued introducing herself. My name is Momo Yaoyorozu. My quirk is called creation. As long as I know its composition, I can create anything that is non-living by molecular manipulation of my fat cells. I enjoy reading, especially illustrated encyclopedias. A pleasure to make your acquaintance, she said as she returned to her place. He was at a loss for words regarding Momo's peculiarity. She was only constrained by her creativity and the amount of materials available to Hera. It was the most adaptable quirk in the class, hands down. Izuku just gave her a smile, which she returned with a slightly flushed face. Mineta saw this, too, and was staring at Izuku with a jealous expression. Aizawa got to his feet, his expression seemingly unchanged from when he entered the classroom. Good. Despite some unnecessary boisterousness, you followed the instructions I give you. You are indeed learning common sense. As there is no more time to do something worthwhile during this period, I will take my lead. Please make sure to behave yourselves with the other teachers and do not waste their time. I would be very upset if you embarrass me. Oh, by the way, you can seat anywhere you like from now on, he said carelessly as he began walking toward the entrance to the classroom. He quickly left the classroom, drawing a mixture of disbelief and annoyance from the members of Class 1A. All that matters to him is his reputation, was the general consensus. Aizawa arrived with a few significant differences, and everyone resumed their activities since they still had about 15 minutes before the next period. The class's most gregarious members, Mina, Tsuyu, Denki, Kirishima, Kyoka, Shiro, and Toru, had joined the group that already included Izuku, Momo, Ochako, and Tenya. When Mina teased him by poking his biceps several times, Katsuki frowned and noticed that Izuku was blushing and laughing tensely. The others seemed to find this amusing. So, when that damn nerd glared at me, that's what he used to make me back off of this king's will. I guess it's just one more facet of his eccentricity. Besides, it doesn't really matter. Until he dies and realizes that I am the stronger of the two of us, I will kill him with my quirk. He ground his teeth and thought angrily. For his part, Todoroki just gave Izuku a neutral expression. Armament, mantra, and the will of the Kinga. How fascinating, Izuku Midoriya. The remaining portion of the morning was divided into two 1.5-hour periods. English with present mic and modern literature with the character Cementos. When lunchtime finally arrived, which was prepared by the heroic lunch Russia, all of the students assembled in the mess hall following the entirely regular class period. Izuku, of course, was fangirling on the inside after meeting so many well-known heroes, even though she paid attention in class and relished the excellent but inexpensive food. To his shame, Momo and Ochako appeared to notice this as well, as the former gave him a look of fond amusement and the latter was doing her best not to laugh out loud. However, that was the end of the regular session because Foundational Hero Studies was scheduled to begin after lunch. When they returned to Class 1A, the students were so enthused about the lesson and the fact that All Might would be teaching it that they had already taken their desired seats and could choose whichever they pleased. Momo and Ochako were seated in the middle rows, with Izuku and Tenya sitting behind them because they were taller than them. Izuku, Momo, and Iida preferred to sit as close to the blackboard as was practical, and Ochako only wanted to sit close to them. Around them sat the people who had joined them following the introductions. Ha 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 ah ha ha ha. All except one of them became excited upon hearing the distinctive laughter that seemed to be coming from everywhere at once. The only person to roll his eyes was Izuku. He growled to himself, does he always have to do anything over the top? In frustration? IAM. Toshinori Yagi, in his all-might muscular form, stood there leaning forward with his massive chest sticking out and his cape somehow billowing forward due to a non-existent breeze. He was dressed in a skin-tight costume consisting of a red top, blue pants, yellow gloves and boots with white accents, and a blue cape with a red inner side. Coming through the door like a normal person. Izuku started to perspire. Is that typical? All Might excitedly and joyously started to march into the classroom and over to the desk. Kaminari exclaimed in shock, "I can't believe it, All Might is really going to be teaching us." Kirishima smiled and said, "That design is so Silver Age. The art style clashes so much that it almost gives me goosebumps." All Might gave the students his back in a flexing pose the moment he stepped in front of the desk. "Foundational Hero Studies," he started, his whole body vibrating a little. "For this class, we'll be building up your foundations through various trials. This class is the most important one within your curriculum." The whole class, including a somewhat irritated Izuku, was listening to everything he said. With that in mind, All Might rambled before abruptly turning to face them and striking an epic pose while holding a little piece of paper with the word "Battle" written on it. This caused everyone to flinch in surprise. "Let's jump right into it with the trial of battle." Izuku furiously rolled his eyes once more, off the damn course. Bakugo, who was seated in the center, grinned with anticipation. The trial of battle. With a broad smile, All Might assumed another heroic stance, spreading his arms and legs wide. As he trailed off, he pressed a button on a device he had pulled out from somewhere, saying, "Indeed. And to go with your first battle." This caused several hidden compartments in the walls to emerge. Numerous metal suitcases bearing the names of all the students in the classroom were stored in these compartments. "We have prepared the gear we had you send in requests to match your quirks." Zero exclaimed, "Our battle gear!" Kirishima exclaimed, "Awesome," with excitement. With the development department that UA has and the rumored funds possesses, so it's not surprising that everyone had their costumes ready by the time classes started. Izuku mused, his smile developing gradually as he discovered that everyone else's excitement was contagious. All Might epically turned towards the door, his cape trailing down behind him as he looked back at them over his shoulder. "Go get changed and we'll be ready to go. We will head to Training Ground Beta. The garb you bring into the battlefield is vitally important, boys and girls. And remember, from here on out, you are all officially heroes." All Might waited for his students to emerge from Training Ground Beta, standing epically with his arms crossed in front of the control buildings. He appeared to be as confident as ever, but on the inside he was a little anxious. That 10 months of training Izuku had given him greater confidence in his teaching skills, but that was a very different situation from this one, where he was in charge of 20 teenagers who would go on to become Japan's future heroes. "To the best of my ability, I'll just make sure to impart to them everything I was taught." Toshinori nodded decisively, thinking to himself, "Everything that I learned here and from Master and from Gran Torino-sensei, though severely toned down in the latter's case, should be more than enough." When he noticed the doors opening and his students approaching him dressed as heroes, his ears perked up and his smile got bigger. As they approached him, All Might examined each one of them. Short A.N. Izuku's costume is the only one that differs, and it's the last one that is discussed, in case you wanted to skip over the parts you already knew. Yuga Aoyama's outfit was violet in hue, shaped like a slender knight's armor with a shimmering cape. It also included a belt with a buckle in the shape of a ring that helped him make better use of his peculiarity. In addition, he wore a visor in the form of a wing. Mina Ishido's skin-tight camouflage bodysuit in purple and turquoise and her tan vest with a white fur collar made up her hero costume. In addition to her dark purple and tan boots, she wore a white mask. Tsuyu Asui's outfit was a black and green tight suit with yellow linings that mimicked the skin patterns of frogs. She also wore gloves, goggles, and frog-patterned high-heeled boots. Iida Tenya wore a high-collared black one-piece suit over which he wore a variety of silver-colored armor pieces, such as a helmet, breastplate, metal vambraces that extended past his elbows, a metal mask with holes covering his entire face but his eyes, a metal collar around his neck, and decorative mufflers that extended back from his midriff. Specialized metal boots that went past his knees were part of the costume. The outfit worn by Ochako Uraraka included a skin-tight black and pink suit with detachable sleeves, knee-high boots, a belt, a helmet, a collar, and thick, round bracers with handles. Ojiro Mashirao wore a white outfit resembling a karate uniform, with a partially furred collar and a hole for his tail in back. Denki Kaminari's outfit included a white shirt underneath, a belt, black pants with a single stripe down each leg, a headset, and a black jacket that he wore open with lightning patterns. In Eijiro Kirishima's costume, A ripped patterned skirt was worn over pants with a R belt, and he wore a vest made up of two gear-shaped shoulder pads that wrapped around his shoulders, leaving his chest uncovered. He also had a jaw guard around his mouth that resembled the fangs of some kind of animal. Koji Koda's outfit included matching shoes and a short-sleeved, short-legged, dark yellow and red bodysuit with a set of teeth that resembled an open mouth around the chest. A yellow full bodysuit with two openings for Rikido Sato's mouth and hair served as his costume. He had a utility belt around his waist, white gloves, and boots on. Mezzo Shoji's outfit was a sleeveless shirt with two different shades of blue sewn to a face mask that covered his lower face. His light blue pants were tucked into light blue boots that reached halfway up his legs, and he wore a bronze buckled belt to hold them up. Kyoka Jiro wore a long salmon-colored shirt with multiple rips at the collar and bottom, black pants, and boots with stereos inside as part of his costume. She also wore white fingerless gloves, a simple black choker, and two tiny red triangle facial marks located just below her eyes. Honta Siro's outfit was a full-body black suit with white designs running across his midsection. The sleeves were probably left short to allow him to make the most of his peculiarity. He wore white boots with an orange trim and white bands around his thighs and waist. A matching orange trim finished his sleeves, and he wore two orange shoulder pads that resembled his elbows. He topped off his ensemble with a tape dispenser-shaped helmet. It appeared that Fumikage Tokiyami's outfit was limited to black boots and a dark, purple robe covering his whole torso. Shoto Todoroki wore a gold-colored combat vest along with a basic white shirt, white pants, and white boots. His left arm, head, and torso were all covered in ice as well. All Might surmised that the light blue gloves with pink lines floating above and the brownish-gray shoes belonged to Toru Hagakure, the girl who was perpetually invisible due to her uncontrollable light manipulation quirk. A fitted black sleeveless V-neck tank top with an orange X around the top bordering his shirt collar served as Katsuki Bakugo's costume. In addition, a neck brace that appeared to be metallic was fashioned into a collar for him, with 3 holes on each side. His sleeves extended to his biceps from inside his enormous gauntlets, which resembled grenades. His loose-fitting knee-guarded pants were held up by his belt, which also carried grenades. There were black combat boots with orange soles and eyelets, knee-high, covering those guards. The large flare-shaped cloth on his hero mask. Minoru Mineta had on a very basic costume. It was dressed in a yellow cape, pants, boots, gloves, and a purple shirt and mask. Momo Yaoyorozu's outfit included matching red boots and a red vest that resembled a leotard with silver trim and linings. She wore a utility belt made of gold that matched the band across her chest. Her vest is open from the waist above the belt to the center of the collar. Lastly, Izuku's outfit was a black cargo vest with a hood that was left open over a tight, long-sleeved dark green shirt. Red elbow guards covered his elbows, and black fingerless gloves covered his hands. His red utility belt held up his black cargo pants with dark green lines running down the sides. He tucked them into red combat shoes that reached above his shins, and red knee guards covered his knees. His breathing mask, which was red and black in color, completed his outfit. In all honesty, the only component of young Midoriya's outfit that serves a unique purpose is his breathing mask, which modifies the oxygen concentration to maintain young Midoriya's performance at its best for a considerable amount of time in the unlikely event that his stamina runs out. The rest of his equipment is primarily decorative, even though it is composed of incredibly durable yet flexible material that should be able to withstand the abuse he is sure to give it. All Might nodded appreciatively at the heroic outfits worn by each of his students, realizing that One for All and Armament Hockey were improvements upon themselves after all. When All Might saw Izuku blush slightly in embarrassment, he had to force himself to stop laughing in amusement because he was obviously aware of the looks he was receiving from all the girls. When he saw Izuku, who was almost invisible and who he most likely knew subconsciously as well, he nearly lost it and puffed up his chest in pride. Even though all the boys were physically fit, Izuku had the best body of any of them, excluding All Might himself, and even Toshinori had to concede that it was questionable since he was past his prime. Despite the cargo hooded vest, his long-sleeved green shirt fit his body so well that every muscle in his upper body was visible. The girls appeared to be making use of that fact. All Might thought, To be right in the springtime of youth and full of hormones, slightly unsettling everyone with his abrupt shift in aura to one of epic nostalgia. All Might regained his composure after a short while, and his ever-widening smile spread to include each of his pupils. Okay. Let's see what you got, you embryos. Time for the trial of battle. I'm checking at everyone's styles. Very cool, he said, giving them all a thumbs up as he concluded his conversation, causing them to beam with excitement. After appreciating how fantastic Izuku looked in his costume, Momo and Uraraka recovered first and went up to him, though they were still blushing a little. It was Ochako who spoke first. She gave him a sincere compliment. That's a very cool costume, Deku-kun. It looks very practical too. Before blushing slightly and shyly massaging the back of her head. I wish I'd drawn my request sketch a little better. Thought my costume ended up being both skin tight and puffy at the same time, hee. Momo scoffed and gave Ochako the cold shoulder. She genuinely comforted her, laughing again at Ochako's growing blush. I wouldn't worry too much. It still looks good on you, Oken, before turning to face Izuku and giving him the once-over as well. She gave him a compliment before cocking one hip to the side and crossing her arms under her large breasts, pushing them up and emphasizing her already cleavage. And I have to agree with her, Izuku-kun. You look very cool in your costume. I wanted to show more skin in order to make my quirk more effective, but there are regulations against that, sadly. Yes, how depressing, he thought to himself as he observed his two close female friends dressed as gorgeous heroines. He was so absorbed in absorbing the sight and etching it in his mind that he failed to notice Momo and Ochako almost preening when they noticed how intently he was staring at them. Izuku laughed and shook his head. Thanks. The two of you also look very good in your costumes. Truthfully, the only special part of my costume is the breathing mask, which regulates oxygen concentration when I need to extend my peak level of performance if I'm running on fumes. The rest is more for practicality and aesthetics since, you know, armament, he replied with a helpless shrug. He complimented Momo and Ochako on their appearance, which made them blush a little. At his last remark, the three of them laughed together. Apart from that, Mineta, standing a little apart from the others, studied every girl in the class dressed in their costumes before glancing out to the sky with a level expression and a thumbs up. Heroics is, without a doubt, the best department. Anyhow. Tenya raised his right arm robotically and asked, Sensei, is this the same training ground we'll be using as the one we used during the entrance examination? If it weren't for Mantra, his speech patterns, and his robotic motions, I never would have guessed that it was Tenya-kun, Izuku said, nodding, not bad, and giving Tenya's costume a grateful glance. Well, it looks pretty dope. All Might put his hands epically on his hips and exclaimed, while we will be using one of the urban training grounds in which the practical portion of the entrance examination took place, the setting will be different. This will be an indoor battle trial. He cupped his chin and raised a hand to his face. Imprisonment, a house arrest of the black market. In this quirk-saturated society full of government-backed heroes, any villain with a modicum of intelligence lurks in the shadows. With that in mind, for this test, you will be separated into heroes and villains for 2-on-2 team battles. Suyu tilted her head to the side as a look of surprise passed through the hero aspirants. What about the foundational training? All Might exclaimed, clenching his left fist epically in front of his face. This is foundational training. This time there won't be just robots, it'd be okay to just destroy. So how do we determine who wins and who loses? Asked Momo. Bakugo glared at Izuku, who had just given him a fleeting glance before rolling his eyes, and asked menacingly, is it okay if I can just make them explode until they die? Ochako worriedly and timidly inquired, is there a threat of expulsion like with Aizawa-sensei's exercise? Tenya reached up and raised his right hand robotically. If we are separating into different groups, what would be the best way to do so? Aoyama contorted his body to flaunt his cape. Doesn't this cape look fabulous on Maya? An epic drop of sweat trickled down All Might's temple, giving the impression that he was constipated. HNNN. I can't answer your questions if you ask them all at once. When All Might took out a piece of paper from somewhere and started reading it aloud like a script, Izuku laughed hysterically. After spending a great deal of time with All Might, he had grown accustomed to his somewhat ridiculous side and wondered why it looked so fitting for his personality. Ahem. For this training we'll have some villains guard a nuclear weapon they intend on deploying. The heroes must stop them in their nefarious scheme before it is too late. If the heroes capture the villains, or reach the nuclear core before the time runs out, they win. If the villains manage to keep the core the whole time or capture the heroes, they win. That sounds like stuff from a Golden Age superhero, Izuku thought to himself as he committed the exercise's characteristics to memory. Then All Might showed the lottery box to everyone by taking it out of somewhere. Your teammates and opponents will be chosen at random. Iida questioned, "Is that really how we'll do it?" Izuku could tell by the tone of Tenya's voice that he was looking at her with incredulity, even though she couldn't see his face. He tapped Tenya on the shoulder to get his attention. He spoke loud enough for everyone else to hear in case they had the same reservations as Tenya. Remember that pro-heroes are often to form impromptu with other heroes they have never worked with before, Tenya-kun. So this is more than likely to get us ready for when we have to face a situation like that in the future, he said. Tenya showed understanding with his eyes. "Ah, I see. Are we always looking forward, then?" He trailed off, then turned abruptly to face All Might and bowed precisely 90 degrees robotically. "I apologize for my ignorance." To Izuku's amusement, All Might appeared somewhat uneasy with Tenya's rigid formality and diligence as he turned around in an epic manner. Anyways, let us begin." To find out who their teammates were, everyone went to the lottery box to draw. The groups concluded as follows. Izuku Midoriya and Tsuyu Asui make up Team A. Mezzo Shoji and Shoto Todoroki make up Team B. Momo Yaoyorozu and Ochako Uraraka make up Team C. Iida Tenya and Katsuki Bakugo make up Team D. Mina Ishido and Yuga Aoyama make up Team Ikoji Koda and Rikido Sato make up Team F. Kyoka Juru and Denki Kaminari make up Team G. Fumikage Tokiyami and Minoru Mineta make up Team H. Ojiro Mashirao and Toru Hagakure make up Team I. Eijiro Kirishima and Hanta Siro make up Team J. I desired to play alongside Deku-kun in a team. With a pout, Ochako thought, then looked up and grinned at Momo. "We're in a team together. We must be linked or something." Momo laughed, took Ochako's hands, and smiled broadly at her teammate. "Pleased to have you, Oken." Izuku walked up to the girl with the frog motif and grinned broadly. "It seems we are in a team together, Asui-san. Let's do our best." Tsuyu nodded and tilted her head cutely, blushing almost imperceptibly across her cheeks. "Jero." Izuku gave a blink. "Jero?" Tsuyu blushed a little more, but she remained silent. Then, All Might reached epically into each of the 2 lottery boxes he had pulled out from somewhere, one white, labeled Heroes, and the other black, labeled Villains, to select the members of the team that would play each part in the fictitious exercise. All Might pulled out the results and epically presented them to everyone, saying, "And the first 2 pairs to do combat will be the following. Pair A will be heroes and pair D will be villains." At this, Katsuki tensed up and a savage smile spread across his face. Izuku, on the other hand, showed no emotion. With a flourish, All Might walked up to the 4 students who would be the first to take part in the battle trail and made an epic gesture toward the building where the exercise would take place. This scenario has the villains inside the buildings first. Then, after 5 minutes, the heroes will be let in as well. Everyone else will be able to watch what unfolds through the surveillance cameras. This will allow young Bakugo and young Iida to get inside the heads of villainkind. This is a practical training exercise, so go all out without fear of injury. Though naturally I will cut things short if they get out of hand, he said, his gaze flickering toward Izuku in a manner that only the 9th bearer of One for All had. He immediately got the message. Please give the 3 of them a fair shot and refrain from unintentionally demolishing the building. Izuku nodded slightly to All Might, dismissing the almost vibrating Bakugo, but he still thought, got it, in a somewhat sarcastic manner. All Might inquired, is everything understood? He produced 4 bits of paper and 4 tiny earplugs from somewhere and gave them to the 4 participants when they nodded. That's the layout of the building. Commit it to memory. And use these communicators to keep constantly with your teammates. The villains shall go into the building first. The heroes will do so after 5 minutes. The rest of you follow me to the control room so we can observe everything. Katsuki and Tenya stood waiting for the 5 minutes to pass before the heroes had to enter the building. They had chosen to place the nuclear weapon on the top floor because they thought it would give them the greatest advantage. It may be merely a training exercise, but being a villain still hurts me, Tenya said, rapping his knuckles on the nuclear weapon. Though I suppose I just have to defend this thing. It's very realistic. Very is made of paper match. So. Katsuki growled at a wall a few feet away while wearing a vicious grin. You still think your quirk is superior to mine, huh? When Tenya heard this, he shot his teammate a sardonic glance. I know it won't matter, but I personally saw Midoriya-kun destroy the humongous trap villain with a single punch with no signs of exhaustion after having rampaged through the training grounds during the entrance examination, destroying the other villains like it was nothing. If I were you, I would consider your idea of just charging towards him head-on. It doesn't fucking matter. Katsuki growled, his savage expression growing more intense. I'll show that fucking nerd that he ain't better than me. Tenya could only sigh in frustration and shake his head. Tsuyu said, I noticed that Bakugo has a lot of aggression towards you, Midoriya-chan. Even though you don't seem to care much about him, after she had verified that she had committed the building's layout to memory. Izuku snorted after following suit. To put it gently, I'm pretty sure you will head straight towards me once the exercise starts. His pride blinds him. Maybe we can use that to our advantage, he thought, blinking and turning to face Tsuyu with an impressed expression. You are pretty perceptive, Asui-san. Tsuyu blushed slightly at what she realized was a subtle affirmation. She said, it's one of my many talents, without bragging but also without downplaying it. Few people, in Izuku's opinion, could perform such a feat. And please, call me Tsuyu, all my friends call me that. He said, such a talent is great for a heroine, and when he saw that she was a little embarrassed, he smiled. If we are to be friends, then I'll extend the same courtesy and request you call me Izuku. With a happy expression, Tsuyu nodded. She then tipped her head to the side endearingly and pressed a finger to her chin, saying, Jero. Why are you so sure Bakugo will head towards you after you the moment the exercise starts? Izuku let out a small sigh and folded his arms across his chest. The only reason it appears that I don't care much for Katsuki is that I'm ignoring him the most of the time. The truth is, I can't stand his guts. We've known each other for over 10 years, and when his quirk showed up, he turned into an egotistical bully who used me as his target until I developed my own quirk and acquired the means to defend myself. Nevertheless, because I didn't show off my quirk to the point where he thought I was quirkless until I managed to save him during the incident with the mud villain approximately 11 months ago. He will see this at the chance to set me straight, because in his mind, that was me saying that my quirk was better than his, along with my general dismissive attitude toward him. The fact that I scored higher than him on the entrance exam, and yesterday's quirk apprehension certainly didn't help. Tsuyu gave a sympathetic nod. I take it that you are pretty sure you can beat him. Izuku gave a nod. I am. As much as I don't like Bakugo, I have to give him the props he deserves. His quirk is extremely powerful and he is very skilled in using it in a way that make it being more than just generating explosions from his hands at will. Tsuyu inquired, aware that Izuku still had more to say, but... Izuku gave a shoulder shrug. He said, I am just better than him, and my quirk is stronger than his too, as though it were a given. Tsuyu made sure to ignore the part that said she found that quality extremely attractive, saying instead, you are pretty confident. Izuku gave another head nod. He laughed and said, in this case, I have every reason to be, giving Tsuyu an inquisitive, eager smile that made her blush a little. So, you didn't specify earlier during the introductions, but what exactly your quirk allows you to do? I might have a few ideas that will go perfectly with how Katsuki will act during the exercise that we can use to our advantage. Tsuyu tilted her head to the side, intrigued, and prodded her chin. All Might thought to himself and the other students as they stood up in front of the numerous monitors that would provide them with visuals of what would be happening. No, watch carefully and strategize on your own. But the only person receiving an audio feed in addition to the visual one would be him. All Might struck an epic pose, supporting himself with his left forearm while holding a notebook by the upper part of his body with his left hand and a pencil by his side with his right. For the exercise to be successful, I just hope young Midoriya doesn't overdo it and performs about on par with the other three. He is just one of my students here. I'm not going to show you any preference. He'll receive the same severe marking as the others. Izuku sat in a chair in the middle of a long hallway, leaning forward, his hands hanging limply between his legs, his breathing mask adjusted so that it covered the lower half of his face and the cargo vest's hood pulled up over his head, revealing only his closed eyes. His eyes slowly opened after a short while, and a moment later, Bakugo emerged from around the corner, grinning viciously. He leaned forward slightly and exclaimed, "So, you were expecting me, huh, Deku?" while making a show of setting off a few repeated, tiny explosions from his hands. Izuku remained silent. He simply kept staring at Katsuki while maintaining a neutral expression. The explosion quirk user didn't feel comfortable with this. Play Petty D featuring Represent Deuce Poppy. With a vicious growl, Bakugo threw back his arms and unleashed a burst of energy that sent him hurtling toward Izuku. "Don't fucking look down on me, you fucking nerd." In response, Izuku leapt backwards, grabbing the back of the chair with his hold and flipping his entire body backwards. He then used the motion to pull the chair into the air, putting it between them. "That's not going to work," exclaimed Bakugo, shoving his left hand forward as soon as he was close enough to the flying chair to explode, destroying it with a ball of dark smoke. Just a moment later, a spinning Bakugo emerged from the smoke, reaching the still backpedaling Izuku in an instant. Bakugo had used the momentum of his explosions to propel himself forward and make himself spin around clockwise. He gained momentum to strike Izuku with his right hand by spinning. But before Bakugo could respond, Izuku moved into Bakugo's area without pausing to change the direction of his footfall. He spun around in the same direction as Bakugo's spin, grabbed Katsuki's extended right arm by the forearm with his right hand, and proceeded to slam Bakugo's back firmly and authoritatively against the wall. Did he really read me? That was all that was on Bakugo's mind at that precise moment. The force of Izuku's vertical counterslam caused spit to fly out of Bakugo's mouth, erupting in the sound "Gah." When his head struck the wall as well, Bakugo's vision briefly became blurry due to the force of the blow. The explosion quirk user gritted his teeth and looked with pained eyes at Izuku, who was still holding his arm, only to become enraged at what he saw. Izuku's expression remained exactly the same. Bakugo let out an explosion and swung his left hand towards Izuku, wearing a snarl that was equal parts angry and painful. It missed Izuku because he had let go of Bakugo and leapt back out of the explosion's path. Bakugo was also pushed away from the wall, which appeared to have a faint indentation in the shape of a human on it. Katsuki yelled, "I'm fucking pissed now. Just keep guarding the stupid thing," before launching himself towards Izuku and kicking out with a roundhouse left kick that went straight for the side of Izuku's head. When the momentum of his missed roundhouse kick left him facing away from Izuku, the hockey user simply leaned his upper body back enough to allow Bakugo's boot tip to miss hitting his breathing mask before he pushed himself forwards to hit Bakugo in the middle of his back with a right Spartan kick that sent Katsuki sprawling into the ground face first with a grunt of pain. "Fuck!" snarled Katsuki, pushing himself to his feet and turning around to frighten Izuku while wearing an angry expression. "Why aren't you using your quirk, you shit? Do you think you are fucking better than me, huh?" Bakugo tensed as Izuku, whose eyes were still cool and collected, responded by slipping into his fighting stance. Just a moment later, Izuku leapt, spun around clockwise, and launched a reverse roundhouse left kick directly at Bakugo's head. As he leaned to the left to avoid the kick, Katsuki smiled, but the smile vanished when Izuku delivered a snap kick with his right leg that struck Katsuki square in the face while he was still in the air from his initial motion. With his eyes strained with pain, Bakugo stumbled back, holding his nose to stop the tears that were reflexing down his face. He dismissed the pain as he watched Izuku leap back up to his feet after collapsing to the ground on his back as a result of the physical modification he had made to his body to receive that blow. If it was possible, his rage increased even more upon witnessing Izuku's expression remaining unchanged. He growled, "Stop looking at me like that, god fucking damn it. I'm above you," and then shot himself at Izuku at even faster speeds, reaching him in a matter of seconds. Bakugo used his left hand to strike out, and when Izuku tried to dodge and counter, Bakugo quickly twisted his hand to face downward and released an explosion that altered his path and caused him to soar above Izuku in an arc. The instant he was behind Izuku, he thought triumphantly and unleashed a pinpoint explosion to his back. However, when Katsuki's hand found only air, he became shocked. He thought wildly as Izuku appeared to vanish from his view, only for his eyes to swell and his mouth to split open, spewing saliva. Gah. Izuku had crouched beneath his blow, and as he was still crouching, nearly beneath Katsuki, his form hidden from Katsuki's view by his gauntlets that resembled grenades, he turned and leaned back, bracing his body with his flexed right leg and right hand. Then he launched a rising kick directly into Bakugo's upper abdomen by pushing himself with his right arm and leg. The explosion quirk user was propelled skyward and came to rest on his back a short distance away. Izuku stood up coolly and watched, almost indifferently, as Katsuki clutched the area where he had struck him in agony. Izuku watched as Katsuki gradually gained control of his own earpiece, reaching for it with his right hand and pressing it. "Are you in position, Tsuyu?" His response was a brief stutter before he learned about his colleague, Jero. Izuku gave a nod. "Good. Prepare yourself and wait for the signal, over." "Roger that, over." When Bakugo heard Izuku talking into his communicator, he felt as though the nitroglycerin-like substance he used to create his explosions was filling his entire circulatory system. He let out a snarl or scream and leapt to his feet, ignoring the throbbing that was coming from the places where he had been damaged. He then extended his left arm and pointed directly at Izuku. "Don't you fucking keep looking down on me, Deku. You are just a stepping stone to me. I'm going to fucking make you die, you stupid nerd." He reached for the safety pin that dangled from the far side of his gauntlet's grenade design, which served as a safety lever. Izuku's eyes narrowed and, for the first time since the fight began, his expression changed. Ochako asked inquisitively, "They are separating before entering the building?" One of the screens showed Tsuyu starting to climb the wall using her peculiar ability, while Izuku entered the building through a first-floor window after adjusting his mask and pulling the hood over his head. "It seems like they predicted how Iida and Bakugo would act," Kyoka remarked, pointing to a different screen that showed tenure remaining on one of the upper floors while Katsuki barely waited for the exercise to officially begin before starting to descend. Izuku actually got a chair and sat down on it to appear to be waiting for Bakugo in comfort, which made many people laugh. That's not surprising. Izuku-kun has known Bakugo for more than a decade and they attended the same schools. Despite Izuku quite disliking Bakugo, having spent so much time coexisting with someone will allow you to give accurate prediction of how they would act, said Momo. Mina laughed. She said, "That's true. With that attitude of his, I can't blame Midori-kun from disliking Bakugo." And then she gave Momo a playful smile. Though she was a little envious of the taller girl, she gave her a playful nuzzle and said, "You sure do know a lot about him, Yao Momo. Something you want to share, eh? Momo had a pretty flush. We have met each other a week before the entrance examination when he helped me fend off 3 assaulters the day I came to the prefecture. We hid it from there and became good friends, that's all," she said, giving a cute little wave of her hands while simultaneously considering whether or not she preferred the moniker the girl with the pink skin had given her. Kirishima grinned and exclaimed, "Look! Bakugo reached Midoriya. They are about to get it on." They all witnessed Katsuki being thrown against the wall in their first encounter. Ochako exclaimed, his eyes wide, "Wow, just like a professional martial artist." Mashirao studied the movement and nodded, looking impressed. "Indeed," he said. He remarked, "It's even more impressive when you consider that Midoriya also timed his own spinning and threw with the spinning speed that Bakugo had in order to make the most of use of Bakugo's own momentum, maximizing the damage of effectiveness of the technique." Knowing that Izuku was also a martial artist and secretly preparing to ask him about holding a spar so they could trade techniques. They then witnessed the second exchange, in which Bakugo tried to kick Izuku in the head but was forcefully stopped before Izuku struck Bakugo with a seemingly unexpected kick of his own. Kirishima, Denki, Shiro, Mina, and Kyoka exclaimed, "Damn!" upon seeing that. Tokiyami remarked in an impressed tone, "The level of athleticism, body control, and reflexes required to pull off something like that has to be insane." They were impressed by Bakugo's use of his explosions to abruptly change direction during their third exchange, demonstrating his impressive control over his quirk, but it was all insignificant compared to the feeling they had when they felt Izuku duck down, avoid Bakugo's attack without turning around, and then counterattack with a rising kick that shot Bakugo skyward. Incredulous, Mineta muttered, "What the hell?" Kirishima exclaimed, "Holy shit. With a hint of surprise, Aoyama said, do you guys are noticing the same thing as me, right? Midoriya hasn't used his quirk, Todoroki concluded, crossing his arms. All Might said, that's not necessarily true, upon hearing that, and for that, I'm grateful. If not, the exercise would have ended before each student had a chance to complete it and earn a grade. I'm grateful, young Midoriya. Curious, Toru asked, what do you mean by that, All Might? Momo asked everyone, do you all remember how Izuku's quirk has 3 aspects, right? And went on to explain when they nodded. He might not be using the armament and king's will aspect of it, but he is most certainly using the mantra aspect. During the introduction he said that his range of perception varied depending on how much attention he was paying to his senses, but, since our senses are always working normally, Izuku possesses a passive range of 100 feet that extends in all directions and never varies. Within that range he can feel everything as it is happening, she said. It explains how he avoided Bakugo's previous attack, but isn't that a little unfair? Kaminari asked, chuckling jealously. Everyone else said, absolutely, without hesitation. Then, as everyone watched, Bakugo became even more enraged when he saw Izuku reaching for his communicator and conversing with Tsuyu. This reminded everyone of the girl with the frog theme, so they searched for her on the screens only to discover that she had moved inside the building and was stuck to the ceiling near a door, responding to whatever Izuku was saying. Eventually, the explosion, sporting a quirk, threw his gauntlet at Izuku. When All Might noticed this and heard what Bakugo was saying, he became somewhat concerned. I can't believe young Bakugo will go that far against his fellow students in a situation like this. Huh? Was the reaction of several upon hearing All Might's statement. As your foundational hero studies teacher, I know the specifications of each and every one of your costumes. Young Bakugo's gauntlets allow him to store a great amount of his nitroglycerin like palm sweat, increasing the range and force of his explosions exponentially. In such a closed space, the power of the explosion is also greatly enhanced further. Everyone's eyes grew wide upon hearing this. With wide eyes, Mina exclaimed, All Might Sensei. This is just a lesson. You must stop this before Midori is seriously hurt or worse. Most of the other students nodded in agreement. When All Might simply smiled, it startled everyone. There's no need for that. While I am shocked about the lengths that young Bakugo will go when his pride is wounded, I'm not worried about young Midoriya one bit. Ha 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 ha. He laughed so hard at the end. What do you mean by that, All Might? Kirishima questioned, looking surprised. With a simple laugh, All Might looked at the screen, and everyone else followed suit. You'll see. Dimotherfucker. With that cry, Bakugo pulled the safety pin while wearing a maniacal expression on his face. His gauntlet unleashed an enormous explosion that filled the entire hallway with its blast. Because of its extreme strength, some of the windows on the same side of the adjacent buildings as well as all of the windows on that side of the building exploded. Additionally, the explosion's power was sufficient to demolish the hallway's walls. Bakugo stared at the residual flames from his explosion and laughed almost uncontrollably. He growled, ignoring Tenya's desperate questions that echoed from his communicator. Do you still believe you are better than me? Think again, Deku. Use your fucking quirk? I want to break you at you full strength, you asshole. As the flames subsided, Bakugo noticed a darkened silhouette that was gradually becoming more recognizable as it could only be Izuku. His smile vanished when he realized that Izuku was standing exactly where he had been before he unleashed his explosion. When Bakugo was able to make out Izuku's form through the smoke and flames, his eyes grew wide with disbelief. The hockey user's left arm was raised toward the explosion quirk user, his palm wide open in a stopping motion, and his entire left side was facing Bakugo with his hood no longer covering his head. That's because armament hockey's shiny blackness covered Izuku's entire left side, costume included, leaving Bakugo completely speechless. His green eyes narrowed sharply in Bakugo's direction. The explosion had left the floor scorched, but it had also caused lack of destruction where the intact floor met the hallway walls, beginning where Izuku stood and spreading in a triangular pattern. The hallway was completely intact after that. For the first time since the beginning of his battle with Bakugo, Izuku trailed off with a serious Katsuki, feeling as though his armament hockey was slowly eroding from his fingers. You seriously tried to kill me right now, didn't you? Katsuki bared his teeth and snarled with rage and hatred. "Oh yes, I fucking did. Otherwise you wouldn't have used your quirk. You would have kept looking down on me." Izuku's eyes grew even more narrowed. He said, "I see. Congratulations then. You managed to blow my hood back before I stopped your trump card without effort," his voice betraying anything but the fact that he was on Saturn's. Bakugo nearly screamed in rage as he lifted his right arm once more, aiming it at Izuku, prepared to remove the pin and trigger a similar explosion. "Are still fucking mocking me?" Bakugo exclaimed. Just before Bakugo completely removed the safety pin, Izuku leapt forward, cracked the hallway floor, and reached a wide-eyed Bakugo in an incredible display of speed. Just before the pin was fully out, Izuku, whose hand was covered in armament hockey up to his elbow, grabbed the gauntlet's exit point, meaning that Bakugo was unable to stop what happened next. The UA developers were far from naive, and they understood that devices like the one Bakugo had asked for had a greater potential to injure their user in the event of a malfunction. In this instance, the user safety mechanism activated even though there wasn't a malfunction. The explosion had inverted itself since Izuku had sealed off the ignition's exit point. Normally, that would have destroyed Bakugo's entire left side and caused him to die instantly, but because of the mechanism, all that happened was an explosion 3 times as powerful as Bakugo's usual ones, which completely destroyed his right gauntlet, caused second-degree burns on him, and cracked his ulna and radius. Undoubtedly notable wound, but not in the slightest bit life-threatening. Katsuki let out a painful scream as it continued to hurt like crazy. Izuku narrowed his eyes and closed his fists over the remnants of the small explosion, putting out the flames with trails of smoke rising from between his fingers covered in armor. He said idly as armament withdrew, feeling the parts that had felt almost out of place inside the gauntlet. So that was the safety mechanism, using mantra. It was the only explanation for his audacity to act as he did. In the end, he was not his opponent. Bakugo grunted in agony as Izuku placed his left hand around his wrist and held him in place before he could reflexively reach with his right to hold his right one. Bakugo's fear steadily grew as he peered into Izuku's narrowed eyes. "He used one aspect of his quirk to stop my strongest attacks with his bare hands twice, and before that, he was controlling the fight without using it. Katsuki trailed off as he noticed Izuku cocking his right arm back and balling his fist as it became covered in the shiny black substance that represented Izuku's armament quirk. Then the enhanced appendage took on a silvery hue as arcs of green lightning started to trail off and red veins of power emerge. All Katsuki saw in that instant was a massive fist coming straight at him. "Is going to murder me," Izuku exclaimed, "First gear," before slashing out with his arm. Bakugo was understandably stunned when, rather than punching him, Izuku delivered an uppercut toward the ceiling, stopping his fist right in front of Bakugo's startled face. Tenya had gone and done his part as best he could, despite being extremely frustrated with Bakugo's actions and his unwillingness to work as a team so they could perform as best they could during the exercise. Asui approached Bakugo to try and take out Midoriya, assuming that Bakugo would confront Midoriya first. He'd done what he had to counter her, remembering what she'd said about her quirk giving her frog-like abilities. In order to avoid having any blind spots that Asui could take advantage of, he had moved the nuclear weapon into a corner of the room on the top floor. Not only did the room he was in lack columns that she could have used as cover, but it also had a single door at the entrance that he had not taken his eyes off since moving here. The next few minutes were spent attempting to contact Katsuki, assuming the most villainous of attitudes, and considering Asui's potential powers and how he could counter them. Tenya kept waiting, but Tsuyu had not shown up. A huge explosion shook the building just as he was about to look outside the room. He was nearly thrown to the ground. As soon as he realized what was likely to happen, he started pacing the room and berating Katsuki for using something like that in enclosed spaces, but Katsuki ignored him, just like he had been doing since the exercise started. It's not as if he had the remotest possibility of succeeding. Midoriya is on a whole other level, he remarked sarcastically when Katsuki refused to provide an explanation for the enormous explosion. His pacing had nearly taken him to the other side of the room, so before he could cool down and walk back to stand protectively in front of the nuclear weapon, the floor was suddenly destroyed by a rising shockwave of force that shook the building even more than the explosion and caused damage to all of the windows in the building as well as the buildings next to it. The shockwave of force also destroyed the ceiling of the top floor and continued upward towards the sky. Tenya was thrown to the ground this time because he was unable to maintain his balance. Before he could respond, Asui swiftly crawled into the room, slicing past the upper portion of the door's frame. Her tongue was extended, and it struck and stuck above the nuclear weapon, which was oddly still in place. Suyu then pulled herself toward the weapon with her tongue, landing firmly on its upper part and adhering to its surface in a way that made her look like a frog. Suyu extended her arm to grab her earbud. Nuclear weapon successfully retrieved. The plan was a resounding success. Nuclear weapon successfully retrieved. The plan was a resounding success. Izuku released his hold on Bakugo's wrist, causing him to fall almost limply to the floor. Bakugo barely twitched when he heard Suyu's voice coming from Izuku's communicator. Bakugo's eyes never left the side of the enormous hole Izuku had punched through all the surfaces of the building to the point where the sky was clearly visible, and his face seemed to be stuck in a state of perpetual shock. In an instant, Bakugo jerkily averted his eyes from the nearly unfathomable scene to fixate on Izuku, who had removed his respirator. This gave Katsuki a glimpse of his expression, which consisted of slightly squinted eyes and pursed lips. You, Bakugo was unable to utter words. But Izuku understood what he was trying to say. He nodded and shrugged his shoulders. Yeah. I kept fighting you for two reasons. The first one was to give enough time for Suyu to get into position as close as she could to the weapon without being detected by Tenya-kun. She knew where Tenya had moved the target because while you were making your way down to me, I used the mantra aspect of my quirk to sense where Tenya had moved it. This hallway is directly below the room in which Tenya-kun had put the target. After that I just had to create a distraction that was powerful enough to serve both prevent Tenya from moving to defend the target and as a signal for Suyu to go for it. Bakugo was unable to speak. Then Izuku spoke some more while keeping his narrowed eyes fixed on Katsuki. And the second reason was to show you that there will always be someone better than you, no matter what your pride tells you. And that you have to stop letting something as stupid as a wounded pride to cloud your judgment, because if you allow it to happen in the future, the consequences will be far worse than just a failed training exercise, finished Izuku as he began to leave the unconscious Bakugo. I hope you learned your lesson. Izuku's suddenly abnormally wide back was all that Bakugo could look at as he walked away, still unable to form words. Suddenly, All Might's voice echoed through the numerous speakerphones strewn throughout the building's floors. The hero team wins.
So this was the end of the series. I hope you enjoyed it. To watch more series like this, subscribe to my channel. Till then, bye bye.